Hi, welcome back to How to Start a Novel. So, today we're going to be talking about how to write an erotic romance novel. And I chose this topic because it's February and it's the month of love. And so I want to talk about romance and, in my case, erotic romance, because that's what I write. I write erotic romance novels. And I want to give some advice on how to, I don't want to say perfect them because nothing's always perfect. You're gonna have some things in there that may not fit the genre exactly, and that's totally fine. So, but I want to give you some tips on things that I've done or that I do to enhance or make a better erotic romance novel. So, first, it's just like any other story or novel. You need a beginning, middle, and an end. You need climax. You need a resolution. You need all that you need in any regular novel or short story. You also need a solid plot. And what I mean by a solid plot is you need solid interactions between characters with conflict and things that keeps the reader from not being bored. And I have an entire video on how not to bore your readers. So watch that, and that will give you some tips on how to make a really good, solid plot. Also, you need conflict, as I said before. You're going to need some conflict between your characters. You can have multiple different conflicts in one story, but you want to have a central main conflict that gets resolved at the end. Characters need to be dynamic. And again, I did an entire video on how to make dynamic characters. So I'm going to put links to both of those videos that I mentioned in the description so that you can go ahead and check those out. But characters need to be dynamic. They need to have some spunk. They need to pull the readers in, and the readers need to either love them or hate them. This is something that you're going to need to keep the readers interested. And also with any novel that you write, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, characters need a transformation. So they can't end the story the way they began the story. You want them to have a transformation. They need to be different at the end of after the conflict, after the climax, through the resolution. They need to be a totally different person. Okay, so now we have that out the way. That is something that you're going to need in any novel or any story. So secondly, it's a romance. So you're going to need typical things that a romance novel needs in that story. So romance novels need everything that I just said before, plus you're going to need some more flowery language. You're going to really need to get into that. I don't want to say cheesy because it's not necessarily cheesy, but you want to get really romantic and with the metaphors and the similes and get really into descriptions. Like you really want to pull in that romance between the two people. Like you want to get maybe slightly a little bit cheesy, but you want to pull in that flowery language. You want to have love interests, of course. The love interest that you want to have, a love triangle between three people, or there could just be love between two people and then have a conflict between there. But there's got to be some love in this story. That is not a romance without some love. Also, it must have, for a romance novel, it must have an optimistic love ending. Everything has to be happily ever after. But in my novels, is not always happily ever after, at least not in the first two. So I did a trilogy. And in my trilogy, the first one didn't end quite so great. The second one didn't end quite so happy. But the third one had an optimistic love ending. And that's because I did a trilogy. I put all three of them together and it's one continuous story. So technically in the end, there was an optimistic love ending. So with the romance, that's how you want it to end. Everybody has to be somewhat happily ever after. And the love must be the main event. Like the love has to be the main thing going on. Like it's got to be what you're wanting to see and what closes it out. It has to be the most important thing in the novel. So, of course, we're talking about erotic romance. So we're going to have to talk about the erotic part. So third, let's talk about sex. Okay. In an erotic romance novel, sex is not implied. There's not any like, oh, we're leading up to sex and then we go to the next chapter. No. In an erotic romance novel, you're going to give them the sex. Like they're going to get the sex act. And so there are some tips on how to do that and not make it go too far or over the top. So sex must be realistic. And when I say realistic, I don't mean bland. I don't necessarily mean bland or just regular missionary style sex. I don't mean that. What I mean is it just should be something that's natural to humans, you know, like you might have a relationship that needs some spicing up and they add a third party. That's totally fine. But we just want to make sure that it leans to more realistic so that your readers can relate a little bit more. Or if maybe not necessarily relate, maybe it's just a fantasy that they've always thought about, but and never done, but it's something that realistic between 2, 3, maybe 4 people. And you just want it to be a little bit more realistic. And it doesn't necessarily, like when I say bland, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not, that it's just heterosexual sex either. My first novel, I did sex between a lesbian couple and things like that. Like it, you know, like you don't necessarily want it to be just, you know, bland sex. You can have sex between multiple people, between man and woman, between 2 women, between 2 men. It does not matter, but you want it to still be realistic. Erotica sex in an erotic romance novel is not porn. I want people to understand that it's not porn. This is an act between 2, maybe 3 consensual adults, and it's just natural, normal, maybe a couple of toys in there, sex. It's not porn. And yes, I know that there's a fine line between erotica and between porn, but there is a line. Trust me, there's a line. And I'm not bashing porn because it's a $1 million industry and people like it. And there's no problem with that. I don't see a problem with that. But there's a difference between erotic romance or erotica and porn. Sex, like I said, is a normal human thing. So it should help move the story along. I don't see it as something that should just be thrown in there. If you just throw sex in there, it's people are going to be able to tell. They're going to be able to tell that you just threw it in there just to be throwing sex in there, and it's not going to appeal to very many people. I've seen TV shows and movies and things like that where sex is just thrown in there and you're like, why are we here? Like, why is this going on? Why is this happening? Why does this even make sense? And it will throw you off from the rest of the movie or the rest of the story. So my suggestion is to make sure that it's something in there that helps move the story along, and not just be there for some odd reason. And the biggest deal, and one of the big things that I see in erotic romance that I know, is that sex has to be part of the conflict. Sex either has to be the conflict, it has to move the conflict along, it has to make the conflict worse, but it has to be a big part of the conflict. And it's, in all my stories, it's one of the things that gets everybody, you know, either off on the wrong track, or it intensifies the conflict that's already going on. And that's something that you're going to need in an erotic romance novel. And that's the erotic part. Sex, just like love, is going to be a main part of the story. So they're going to go hand in hand. The sex and the love are going to be a big parts of the story. And that's how you get the erotic romance. Okay, so finally, Erotic romance, I'm going to say it again, is not porn. So people, please stop saying that. Get rid of that stigma. It is not porn. Okay? There is talk of sex, and sex is often part of the conflict, and it is described, but there can be romance and drama that enhances the plot. Like sex enhances the plot, and it enhances the characters, and it gets the characters in trouble. And these characters are normal human beings, so they're going to have sex. That's just simple as that. It just so happens in this novel, we actually discuss the sex and we talk about the sex. And sometimes the sex is good and sometimes it's bad. But don't shy away from the genre because of that. I totally, when I first started to write, and I said this before in other videos, that I tried my hand at just regular romance and it wasn't the same. Like I felt like it didn't feel natural to me. And I was pretty bad at it. I wasn't that good at it. But once I got into erotic romance and I began to write that, I figured out I was actually pretty good at it. And that's why I've been doing it for about 7, almost going on 8 years. Because it's something that I've learned in that time that I've been doing it, close to a decade, that I know how to weave it in there. And to me, it makes the characters more alive and more human and realistic to me. Because it's something that we all do or we wouldn't be here. So, yeah, do not shy away from the genre and don't let the stigma bother you. If it's something that you want to get into, if this is a genre that you really want to write, don't let the stigma get to you. It is a great genre to get into. I enjoy writing it because I wouldn't write something that I didn't love doing. So that is my talk on erotic romance. And I'm bringing it to you here in February because it's the month of love. So we want to talk about romance in any way, shape, or form. But if you like this video, comment down below. If you want to know more about erotic romance or if you have questions, comment down below and I'll try to answer those questions for you. If not in the comments, maybe in another video and maybe a part 2 to this one and give you some more in depth on erotic romance writing. But do not forget to subscribe. That is very important. You should go ahead and subscribe. Share this video as well so that other people who want to get into erotic romance can have something to reference. Okay, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and check out my books on Amazon. All right, I will see you next month where we come with a new topic on how to start a novel. Bye.